for our meeting of our meeting of 1st of March 2018. The agenda actually says the meeting minutes for April 5th. Of course, this meeting hasn't occurred yet, so it's hard to approve these minutes. I'll have to change that, I guess. On the comprehensive minutes for March 1st, carried. Communications, response to inquiries. Response to inquiry from Councillor DeRuse from last month on snow fences and corn rates. And on to the agenda item. So this is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 2 to 4 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal. If council does not adopt an amendment within 150 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 210 days for an official plan amendment, a comment sheet is available at the door for anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments. So item number 1 on the agenda is a status update for Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending 29th of March 2018. Is that report received? Received, thank you. Item number 2 is an official plan amendment, Richmond Secondary Plan and Village of Richmond Community Design Plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 6139 and 6143 Perth Street. There's no delegations for that. I just have some quick clarification to staff, so we'll just come back to that just to clarify some next steps on that before we approve that. Item number 3, official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, 5571, 5575, and 5613 Boundary Road, 5554, 5508, 5570, 5610, and 5800 Frontier Road. So again, we have delegations on that one. We have 9 delegations on that one and a presentation. So we'll come back to that. Item number 4 is the site alteration bylaw. We have 6 delegations and a staff presentation, so we'll hold that one as well. Right. That's it. So that's it. So we'll just go back to item number 2. So I'll just read the full motion first, the recommendation of the report first, so that we understand what we're talking about. I know there was a presentation. I'm not going to go through that, but the report says the Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council approve the proposed modifications to the official plan and Richmond Secondary Plan for 6139 and 6143 Perth Street to permit ground-oriented attached and low-rise apartments along a 5-story retirement home and private communal water system as detailed in document 2. B, approve the proposed modifications to the Village of Richmond Community Design Plan to permit low-rise apartments and retirement home on part of 6143 Perth Street and ground-oriented attached on 6139 Perth Street as detailed in document 3. And C, approve the proposed amendment to the zoning bylaw for part of 6143 Perth Street from rural institutional, rural exception 715 to village residential third density subzone with an exception as well to permit residential low-rise apartments, a minimum floor area, minimum setback, and maximum height for retirement home and smaller drive aisles, and to village residential density 3 subzone E with another rural exception with a holding provision as detailed in document 4 and shown in document 5, and that we approve the detailed sections of this report. So just quickly on the report, I know that, so this is just for anyone, this is the former Hyde Park property in Richmond, right in the middle of Richmond. There's been a 5-story retirement residence that stopped being constructed several years ago. It's been restarted by a new company that's come in to finish the project. They have 1 building substantially complete. This will allow them to then move forward and have that building open. The official plan amendment, though, is more than just that. It's more than just what's in front of us today. So just shed some light on the next steps for this.
The original application for official plan amendment, secondary plan changes, and the zoning bylaw amendment also envision changes to allow for each of the phases within the development to be separated by some mechanism or other. Initially, they were discussing severances. There's an issue with our policy and our position in terms of the private communal water system that we will only support essentially one lot, one owner for the system. We've separated out the components of the official plan amendment to allow the existing sort of completed three-story building to be occupied by giving it the correct official plan designation and zoning. So the next steps in this process now is to start looking at how can we as a city contemplate potential lot creation or division of the different phases within the development. It's a little bit complicated in that there's 92 existing life lease owners of their units on that lot. There will be the retirement residence and then the three-story apartment building and then potentially a next phase. So the owners are contemplating dividing up the life lease from the retirement from the various low-rise apartment uses. And in order to do that, we will only, as a city, our position to them right now is that we will only accept the private communal water system as under one corporate ownership. And we're working with them and the community, the life lease community, to try and find a solution that will work.
I know the owner as well is committed to working with the folks in the life lease community as well on a way forward to give them some options and some certainty as to how their future looks in that property. And then from the perspective of Phase 3B, so Phase 3A is what's existing. That's what we see today, the completed building, the unfinished two other buildings. Phase 3B would also come back. I know there's concerns in the community about the fabric of that development, how that integrates into the existing community, the neighboring properties, with the accesses onto Tallis Circle. So I've expressed concerns about that in the report as well. So that comes back later on, whether it's through the OP or through the site plan agreement, correct?
Correct, that's right. So 3B existing is approved for retirement residents similar to the three-story one that's already built. The applicants are looking at alternative low-rise residential options, apartment options, and because of that, they'll have to amend their site plan and take a look at the servicing requirements for it as well. That servicing would include the sewer, the water, as well as the road infrastructure, the sidewalks, and that sort of thing. That's why staff are recommending the holding zone on that 3B phase.
And this process gives us the opportunity to move past this, but then focus on that later with the community at the same time.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we did have one delegation, Mr. Holtzman, who was on behalf of the applicant. As far as I know, you're comfortable with the staff report, and you don't need to speak if we're going to carry this right now. All right. Thank you. So on item number 2, is that carried? All right. Thank you. So item number 3 is the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for various properties on Boundary Road and Frontier Road in Cumberland Ward. We do have some delegations, but we're going to go through a staff presentation first. It's the Capital Region Resource Recovery Center. So this is one of those odd situations where, as we dealt with the facility on Carp Road a few years ago, the process for these types of facilities are that you must go through the process with the province first, gain approval, and then you come to the city looking for approval for the land. Of course, when it comes to the zoning, that's left to us. The actual facility itself is already approved on the site, same to what we dealt with any other previous landfill or environmental center, resource center applications. So it's kind of an awkward process. I've always felt that if the province wants to approve these things, maybe they should also approve the zoning. But they stick it to us, and they just look at it from a distance. So good times. So Jeff Osvichuk is here to look at, to provide us a presentation on the file.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of committee. The official plan and zoning bylaw amendments before you today are for the Capital Region Resource Recovery Center. Located southeast of Boundary Road, Highway 417 interchange, the lands are bounded by Highway 417 to the north, Divine Road to the south, Boundary Road to the west, Frontier Road to the east. The request to amend the official plan and zoning bylaws to permit a waste processing and disposal site. The purpose of the proposal will be to recover and recycle resources and divert them away from landfill disposal. The facility will process solid non-hazardous waste and soils that are generated by commercial, industrial, institutional, construction and demolition sectors. Operations at the facility will include composting organics, treating contaminated soils, managing surplus soil, collecting landfill gas, pre-treating leachate, and disposing of waste. Lands are currently designated rural employment area and general rural area in the official plan. The current OP designations provide for the opportunity to permit the proposed use, and such is consistent with the provincial policy statement. In addition to operating its own disposal sites, the city has jurisdiction in granting consents for new waste disposal sites. The criteria for such assessments are guided by Section 3.8 of the city's official plan. Current operating solid waste disposal sites are identified in Schedules A and B in the official plan. An amendment to the official plan is required for new waste disposal sites. Evaluation of such amendments is based on the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change approved terms of reference and the environmental assessment. Terms of reference are the guiding principle of the EA and were prepared in conformity with the criteria set out in Section 3.8 of the official plan. The environmental assessment was approved by the Minister and Provincial Cabinet in May 2017. Mr. Chair, with respect to the city's review of the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, the public identified numerous concerns with respect to health, transportation, geotechnical, hydrological, and safety. We note that many of these concerns were raised during the provincial EA process and were addressed in the approved EA. Upon further investigation from a city perspective, 3 matters appeared to require some additional attention. They were traffic, public health, and environmental impacts. Mr. Chair, with respect to traffic assessment, early in the city's review, it had been suggested that the EA and the city did not take into account all the development that was recently approved along Boundary Road. The residents identified the CRRC site and the Eastway Gateway approved long combination truck stop and industrial subdivision. Mr. Chair, while traffic impact assessments provide an evaluation of their respective development, all new proposed developments are considered as a whole. That said, we had asked our engineer responsible for traffic to revisit the 3 projects, and as a result, the following road modifications were identified. At the intersection of Boundary and Thunder Roads, a northbound left turn lane and southbound left turn lane will be constructed and traffic controlled by a signal. At the intersection of Boundary Road and Mitch Owens Drive, an eastbound left turn lane will be constructed. The eastbound ramp terminal of 417 and Boundary Road will be widened and left turn traffic signals and illumination added. The westbound ramp terminal of Highway 417 and Boundary Road will also be widened. With respect to the CRRC site, a southbound left turn lane on Boundary Road at the site, access is proposed to accommodate turning vehicles into the site. The second concern, as for public health, as a result of the circulation of the OP and zoning, Ottawa Public Health confirmed that the proponent studies and follow-up responses to the EA on topics including air, noise, surface water, and groundwater impacts were addressed to their satisfaction. And finally, with concerns related to the environmental assessment, the city is satisfied that the EA has met the city's EIS requirements with respect to the proposed OPA and ZBA. A holding provision to the zoning will be placed on the site pending final review of the site plan and the environmental compliance approval. Mr. Chair, with respect to the proposed zoning, currently the site is zoned a combination of rural countryside and rural heavy industrial. To accommodate the proposed development, the site will be rezoned to rural heavy industrial with an exception in addition to a holding provision. The exceptions will add the solid waste disposal facility use to the bylaw and will address changes to parking and lot width provisions. As for the holding provisions, as noted earlier in this presentation, the hold on the site development will remain pending final review of the city's natural heritage interest in connection with the proponent's site plan and environmental compliance approval. An additional hold has also been placed on the solid waste disposal area of the site. Such a facility will not be permitted to operate until such time as the processing and transfer facility has been constructed and operational. Mr. Chair, to conclude, when the city consulted publicly and examined the EA from a city perspective, the concerns raised were re-examined by city staff. The conclusion of the various consulted experts was that many of the concerns raised had been addressed in the EA. Any gaps in the approval that did not initially satisfy our land use concerns have been investigated, and the city is satisfied from a land use and ongoing operation monitoring perspective. Planning, Infrastructure and Development Department recommend approval of the OPA and zoning bylaw amendment. Thank you. That ends my presentation.
Thank you. I'm not going to do any questions from councillors at this time, but I do know that Councillor Blais has some motions on this file that I think are important to read, to go through, to introduce just before we get to the list of delegations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The first motion is related to the roadway and intersection modifications and traffic disruption during construction. And so whereas the construction of the Capital Region Resource Recovery Center and the East Gateway subdivision represent a significant change to the area around Boundary Road, whereas the traffic impact assessment for East Gateway identified the following roadway modifications and they're listed, and whereas the traffic impact assessment for the CRRC has identified the following roadway modifications and they're listed, whereas the construction of these two facilities and the required roadway modifications will be significant nuisance and inconvenience to local residents and motorists. Therefore, be it resolved that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council ensure all roadway and intersection works associated for both projects be built concurrently and be coordinated at a time to ensure minimal possible impact on the public. And the second motion is relating more specifically to the IC&I and C&D waste streams. As we know, regulations on these two streams are held by the Government of Ontario. They represent the majority of waste we produce, and diversion in these sectors is not currently meeting any kind of targets, and in my view there is no plan to do so. Whereas industrial, commercial, and institutional IC&I and construction and demolition C&D waste is regulated by the Government of Ontario, whereas the impacts of continuing to miss waste diversion targets in these sectors are borne by local residents in the municipality. Therefore, be resolved that the City of Ottawa formally requests from the Government of Ontario the authority and funding to regulate the ICI and C&D waste streams.
All right, thank you for introducing those motions. So we will go right to our delegations. So if I call you up, there's just come to the front here in this front seat. Our first speaker is Ann Shibley. Our second speaker will be Mr. Harry Baker. So if you're, so you're going to be side by side. Perfect.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah, good.
So I will just say before you speak that all delegations will have 5 minutes to address the committee. So 5 minutes.
Right, that's why I gave the handouts in case I get cut off.
Thank you.
So if you want to go to the first slide there, thank you. Yeah, so this is Patterson's Berry Farm, Edwards, 1985. I might also mention it's just south of Mitch Owens, which is one of the haul routes. So about myself, my name is Ann Shibley. I've lived in Russell since 1985. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, had a career as a registered nurse. As you can see, it's been through the lifespan from neonatal up to palliative care, end of life. I was a board member of the Russell Community Association in the 1980s. When this site was known as Site 10, I opposed that project. I was a young mother on the grounds of air and groundwater pollution. It was deemed an unfit site, hydrogeologically, environmentally, and from a construction viewpoint. It was abandoned as an unfit site. I still believe it's an unfit site today. I'm a board member of CISA at this point in time. Next slide, please. This is Ava, and she is really why I'm here today. She's one of our grandchildren. She represents one of the most vulnerable demographics to be affected by this project. I'm also here today to impress upon you how scandalous it is that this project does not include a human health risk assessment. Next slide, please. So health concerns here, landfill and biogas flare equals air and groundwater pollution. Landfills leak, it's not a matter of if, but when. Richmond, Shelburne, Carp, and I believe Navan is also leaking. Groundwater and air pollution, underground streams, air and noise pollution from high-volume truck traffic along haul routes. Ontario can say goodbye to the carbon emissions target. Also, Owen Clarkin, who would have been presenting today but couldn't get the time off work, was going to address the reforestation issue. Trees do mitigate against cancer. We're losing 400 acres of forest. And they also mitigate against carbon emissions. There are known carcinogens emanating from the project, endocrine disruptors, respiratory irritants, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, benzene, nitrogen oxides, and hydrogen sulfide. Next slide, please. The site itself is close to farms, dairy, corn, soy, organic produce, meat, and fruit. It's close to schools and the communities of Carlsbad Springs, Edwards, Vase, and borders Russell Township. There is a school, St. Guillaume, in Vase, within 5 kilometers as the crow flies. It will degrade the environment and the food we all eat. It's not just our children, it's yours too. This is where our food comes from, and it's not right for urban areas to dump waste in rural areas and make them into sacrifice electorates. Next slide, please. A little bit about the health effects. Babies and children are particularly vulnerable to air pollution, environmental toxins. Please see the references that I've listed at the end. Their organ systems are developing. As a recent study in 2016 has shown an association between landfill pollutant exposure and respiratory illnesses, with children living within 5 kilometers of landfills. Birth defects research in Washington State has indicated an increased risk according to distances from landfill sites. Other research has afforded enough concern to encourage a precautionary principle approach, especially when considering vulnerable populations. The developing brain of the child is particularly vulnerable to toxins. This is an evolving area and has shown an association between cognitive impairments, development of autism, and neurodegenerative disorders. There is a professor actually from Carleton University in Ottawa who has done leading edge research in this area, and I direct you to reference number 6. That article just came out this week. Next slide, please.
Just an update, you have 30 seconds.
I have 3 seconds.
30, sorry.
Okay, so I will just make the point that this is not best practice. It was pointed out that it was lacking a human health risk assessment, and I will go to the next slide, thank you. So trust in environmental justice, fact or fiction. Stephen Blay mentioned some of the reasons that Carlsbad Springs residents no longer trust. Well, these are some of the other reasons. I would direct you to that article too that came out just this month talking about the problems with disclosure from owners of landfill sites. This also, I might like to make the point, it doesn't discourage the generation of waste. The more there is to recycle and dump, the more money Taggart Miller will make in the city of Ottawa also. Next slide, please.
All right, thanks. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap, can you wrap up really quickly, because I did let you know you had 30 seconds to go, and you're a bit over time now.
I have 2 slides, actually.
I'm just trying to be fair to everyone else that speaks today.
Okay, I will go to the next slide. Sorry, the previous slide. Not this slide, the previous slide, thank you. So what we are doing here is actually volunteering, asking Taggart Miller to volunteer to do a human health risk assessment, and failing that the City of Ottawa should insist, in accordance with their official plan, also to insist on a comprehensive and continuing monitoring program based on cumulative health risks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for providing the written comments as well. I know there's a bunch of references in the back, which is helpful. You referenced the one, number 6, so thank you. Any questions for the delegation? No, thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Harry Baker.
Yes, I'm Harry Baker. I have a Master's of Applied Science in Civil Engineering. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the province of Ontario since 1976. I'm a fellow of the Engineering Institute of Canada. My home is in the village of Russell for the past 37 years, and I have 4 children and 8 grandchildren who live in the area. I've been the president of the Citizens Environmental Stewardship Association east of Ottawa for the past 5 years, and I'm a member of the Environmental Advisory Committee to the Township of Russell. Thank you very much. So our organization from the very beginning of this project in November 2010 has been concerned about the health risks associated with the Taggart Miller facility. First it was going to be in North Russell, now it's going to be at Boundary Road, and its potential for polluting the air, surface water, and groundwater leaving the site. No matter what engineers design as barriers, all dumps pollute the area well beyond their site boundaries. We need only look at the Carp Road dump for evidence of groundwater contamination and air pollution, evidenced by odor complaints. So this is a ground contamination survey that was done in 2010, and these things keep leaching out into the groundwater continuously for as long as they're there, which is forever. So you can see it's gone well beyond its boundary. It's actually come out underneath the 417, and we're now seeing it in the ditch along the 417. So now it's become surface water. So groundwater to surface water. The other side looks at odors. Again, odors are not themselves necessarily toxic, but they're an indication of how far the pollutants in the air will travel. So there's the complaints around Kanata and Stittsville associated with the Carp Road dump, and at least 7 kilometers away. And this has impacted a lot of the community events in the area. So this is just an idea of what we expect it's going to be like at Boundary Road. From the very beginning, we raised our concerns to everyone who would listen about the potential for pollutants entering the air, groundwater, and surface water beyond the dump site. We even asked for it to be in the terms of reference, but for some reason the MOE decided not to include it. And there was no human health impact study required by the scoped MOE environmental assessment. Our experts that we hired, thanks to the money provided by the city, Arcadis Senis, stated very early on in the EA process that this EA lacks a human health risk assessment which would have assessed the effects of changes to air quality, water quality, and several social factors on human health indicators. And we dispute the city's claim that the public health issues were fully addressed and satisfied by the MOE's EA process. The modeling of movement of air pollutants is not sufficient and must be proven by off-site monitoring. Several recent human health studies done in Montreal, Great Britain, and Italy, they're all referenced in the handout that I have. I hope you've received the handout. They're showing that airborne volatile organic compounds from landfills impact human respiratory health, as Mrs. Shibley has already mentioned, especially in children. And there's a high incidence of cancer among persons living at a distance of up to at least 5 kilometers from the site. It can be assumed that these negative health impacts extend beyond this limit, particularly in the prevailing wind directions. So here's the prevailing wind directions. There's the 5 kilometer radius around the Boundary Road site. This actually is the circle that they use for their property value protection. And it really should be out probably at least another half a kilometer because they measure from the center of the site. We're looking at a 5 kilometer radius from the outside of the site. And these are the predominant winds. So winds coming from the southwest toward the city of Ottawa, Vars, the eastern part, and in the winter coming from the northwest down to Russell Township and toward Embrun. This is what our concern is. This is the area that we're most concerned about the health of our community. The City of Ottawa official plan guidelines state that good air quality is critical to maintaining environmental and human health. Protecting and improving and restoring the quality and quantity of groundwater is an environmental and a public health issue. We're demanding a comprehensive human health risk assessment, similar to that being done by the Walker Environmental Group for their proposed landfill at Ingersoll in Oxford County, Ontario. This is the precedent that's been set.
Just to give you an update, it's 30 seconds to go.
Yep, this is my last slide. A continuing and comprehensive monitoring plan to detect any known threats to human health, both during the operations phase and the post-closure phase of the landfill, to ensure any mitigation measures are initiated in a timely manner, and the development of contingency plans to reasonably address the risks identified in the human health impact study. The bottom line is, our calls for human health risk assessment remain outstanding with the MOE and with you. We're not asking the city to overturn or override or otherwise suspend the EA approval. We know that the city has no legal authority to do so. We're asking the city to independently and appropriately exercise its own jurisdiction under the Planning Act, ensure that the city's land use planning decisions in this matter are consistent with the applicable policies of the provincial policy statement and conforms with the requirements of the current official plan. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, so I know that just a couple comments, questions from members of the committee. I'd start with Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Chair. Just for a point of clarification on your slide there for the Carp landfill, I believe the groundwater issues came from the original landfill, which was really just, it was called the rump dump, and it was just a pit where garbage went into. That current landfill now has a liner. There's all kinds of measures in place to protect the area. The new one, the proposal that we're looking for here, starts with the liner, if I understand correctly. So you're not going to experience the issues that you're seeing there with carp, because those complaints you dated are 2007.
You can't debate that.
They're not, the last 4 or 5 years, there isn't any of that going on where they're complaining about smell or any of that.
I can't speak to you exactly about that. I'm an engineer, and my understanding of the way in which they design barriers, or what you call liners, that they actually recognize that there's going to be leaks in a liner. These things are placed in the field, they're rolled out like carpets, they're welded in and they're not impervious. And there's always leaks. And so the design always includes a certain amount of leaks. So all liners leak, and you're right, the original landfill what did not have a liner was on fractured rock. However, how do you determine whether a pollutant is coming from the old one or the new one? How do you determine? I don't know how that's done. So I'm just saying, I could dispute you, sir, that all of that pollution is not from the old dump.
The reports that you're talking about are measured from the old dump. The stuff that you're talking about, the leakage of that. Yes, a new liner can have some leakage, but you would never get the impacts that you're showing here for that landfill. And I think the city staff recognized that at the time and worked with the current manager of that site to try and address all those issues, like with they catch the gas, that kind of stuff. That was leading to a lot of the odor.
So the gas is after they've capped the waste pile. That's the gas that the landfill gives out. That's nothing to do with. This is leachate. So this is rain comes down, goes through the garbage, and then the water that's contaminated goes into the groundwater or is collected somehow.
Groundwater, but you also referenced the odors, and I was saying the odors came from the gas, or bulk of the odors came from the gas, and so they put a system in place to capture those gases. And I believe, Councillor Alcantara, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they convert that gas into energy now.
So smells, sir, are not necessarily landfill gas. What those smells are from winds that come and they collect stuff off the landfill, and they take them away. So any landfill, your trail road landfill, there's been lots of discussion about smells coming from that this winter. And so the landfill gas, which they're burning off after, is nothing to do with the smells that I'm talking about.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Blake.
Thank you. And just before I ask my question, where is the public health official? Just because I want to make sure they're listening.
Sorry, there are representatives here from Ottawa Public Health here today.
Pay close attention to this because I'm going to ask you to respond to, I think, what Mr. Baker's answer is going to be at some point. Can you articulate, Mr. Baker, a little bit more? You had indicated you disagreed with Ottawa Public Health's response that their issues were satisfied in the environmental assessment. Could you explain, perhaps in slightly more detail, as to why, so that when it's their turn, I can ask them to respond to that?
I read in the staff report that your medical officer of health had said that they were satisfied with the work that the MOE had done. And the MOE's giving approval is based on air modeling. It's not based on any measurements. It's based on air modeling, so a model that they use presumably all over Ontario. And all I'm saying is, as an engineer, I would use modeling for first indication, but I would never use that modeling to indicate that something's not a risk. I would always want to have monitoring to show that the model was correct. I don't know the assumptions. I don't know all the other things that the model was looking at. But modeling is the only way, monitoring is the only way to verify whether this is working.
Perfect. And you would agree that the monitoring can't take place until the facility is actually constructed and in operation?
Well, I would hope that they would do some monitoring before it's done to make sure that you're not looking at something from some other source.
That's fine, but monitoring the impact has to happen after it's approved and constructed and in operation.
Yes, and the only modeling the only monitoring I see off-site is for dust.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for coming out today.
Right. Thank you to both of you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Alcantara just wanted to make a comment or ask a question. Sorry, Mr. Baker, thanks.
If I can ask you more than, you're an engineer, can you tell us what?
So my undergraduate was in engineering geology, and my master's degree was in civil engineering or geotechnical engineering.
Thank you for that. No, but I think, I know Councillor Hubley spoke about what's taking place or what took place in CARP, and really what, I think my mics keep cutting out. What Chair Moffat said earlier, I wish the province will take the whole process about the landfill, because they leave it, they do the decision in their court, and then they ask municipality then to deal with the resident on something we have no control over what they begin with. So our discussion in this room really is about the zoning. When you talk about lining, we had California come in to educate us about the lining. Yes, you're right. Like anything else in life, you can't guarantee it's never going to go bad. But I mean, the lining has a protection, could be to 25, 50 years before any leaks, and maybe never leaks. But what you're talking about, the leakage in CARP, that was from the old rum dump, we call it in our community, because it was no lining and was just a hole in the ground and a rocky pit.
So the proposed dump at Boundary Road has only got a small perimeter liner. There's not a proper double liner that we would see in most modern dumps being proposed here. So there's not going to be any more lining at this site than at CARP. But if I can just respond to your, I know that it's being passed on to the municipality and the issues, but you have, as part of your official plan and your zoning bylaw, you have a commitment to make sure that the facility is not going to harm the people that live in the area. And all we're not asking you to move it somewhere else. We're not even asking you to curtail them in any way. We're just asking that they do a human health risk study and they do some off-site monitoring to make sure there's no pollutants leaving the site which are going to be harmful in the long term to people that are living here. I'm not talking about somebody driving by a car that gets a whiff of bad air. I'm talking about people that live there. And you're going to say to me, well, there are not that many people that live within 5 kilometers. But the city has needs to take action because you tend to want to allow developers to build right up against the landfill, like you do in Navan, like you do near CARP. You're allowing people to build homes and to live there whose potentially their health is at risk. And we're raising the alarm that we believe people's health is at risk. And we would like the proponent to do a human health risk study to alleviate the fears of we who live nearby.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Bob Spasoff. Please forgive me if I pronounced your last name wrong. And following him, we'll have Mr. Charles Armstrong.
Are there slides?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, he says there aren't. I'm a retired physician and a professor of epidemiology. I've lived in Ottawa, about 2 kilometers from the RRC for 39 years. The health concerns arising from waste disposal sites include low birth weight, several cancers, lung problems, and internal disorders like liver and kidney disease. I shall comment on the evidence base for these concerns, concentrating on the landfill, which will accept the vast majority of the waste arriving at the recovery center, and then turn to what we should do next. The topic has not been widely researched, and most reviews have concluded that the evidence for adverse health effects is limited or inadequate. That's not surprising, since this research is extremely difficult. The mix of potential toxins is varied, frequently unknown. Their interactions are complex, their modes of dispersion equally so, and the measurement of exposure is both difficult and expensive. These problems can produce false negative or false positive results, but several well-conducted studies, notably the ones at the Miron Quarry site in Montreal, have found worrisome health effects, either statistically significant elevations of disease or dose-response relationships, meaning that the more you're exposed, the more likely you are to get sick. I believe that the precautionary principle should be implemented here, as promoted by UN agencies, US government agencies, and the European community. When an activity raises threats of harm to human health or the environment, precautionary measures should be taken, even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established scientifically. The Carlsbad facility having been approved, we can only try to limit its ill effects through monitoring its emissions. No one knows exactly what substances will be brought to it, but the release of known or unsuspected or suspected health hazards should be monitored. I have found Taggart Miller's environmental monitoring plan to be fairly comprehensive, but there appear to be certain weaknesses. I saw no mention of asbestos, a well-known health hazard that will surely be a part of the construction waste that will arrive at the facility. This will be more of a hazard to the workers than to the general population. I hope that benzene, a known carcinogen, will be completed in the complete VOC scan. Air quality will be monitored only once per year at 2 sites and will measure only particulate matter. No mention of sulfur compounds, nitrogen oxides, or hydrocarbons. There should also be air sampling near the entrance on Boundary Road for emissions from the several hundred large diesel trucks that will arrive each day, probably queuing at length. Monitoring should include carbon monoxide, unburned hydrocarbons, particulate matter, and nitrogen oxides. When the landfill begins to leak, it will pollute the shallow wells that many local residents use, the water from deep drilled wells being too foul for most people to tolerate. A sample of such wells should be monitored beginning at once in order to provide before measures and continuing for decades after the site is closed. By definition, these must be measured outside the boundaries of the facility. Ideally, the City of Ottawa would do the monitoring itself. Failing that, it should do whatever it can, and I'm not sure what all it can do, but I hope you can do something, to ensure that the measurements taken by the owners of the facility are objective and that their reporting is not selective. Careful monitoring of the monitors may help the city to avoid a future disaster or at least a scandal. And I thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Spastov? No? All right, thank you for your presentation. Appreciate that. Mr. Armstrong. And our next speaker will be Dr. Jerry Hamans.
From the beginning. Thank you. Good morning, councillors. I'm Charles Armstrong, a resident of the village of Embrun and in the township of Russell, and the director of the Citizens Environmental Stewardship Association east of Ottawa. And just to get everybody clear, my degree is in physics and mathematics. In my lifetime, I've personally witnessed several environmental disasters from around the world and from industrial and municipal disposal sites. All of these cases, no assessment of human risk or environmental health was conducted, and consequently disaster mitigation was delayed or non-existent. In the matter of hand, the CRRC proposes to dump almost 14 million tons of waste on the eastern edge of the city near the boundary of the township of Russell. I believe the city has a legal and moral obligation to assess the risks to health and to ensure these risks are properly mitigated. I am here asking that the official plan and zoning approvals requested by the proponent require that a proper risk assessment and a risk-based monitoring and reporting system be established. Let's quickly review the statutory, regulatory, and policy framework relevant Both the Planning and the Municipal Act simply state the city cannot frustrate the provincial approval of the CRRC. I'm not here to ask you to attempt to overturn, override, or in any way revoke or suspend the environmental assessment approval. I only wish to ensure that the city's land use planning decisions are consistent with all of the applicable policies, including the provincial policy statement, which says Ontario's long-term prosperity, environmental health, and social well-being depend on reducing the potential for public cost or risk to Ontario's residents from natural or man-made hazards. Also, your own official plan states, good air quality is critical to maintaining environmental and human health and protecting and improving and restoring the quality of groundwater is an environmental and public health issue. Within the freedom of the freedom that's granted to the city in the Planning Act and the Municipal Act, I think we should have a risk-based human health assessment. The notice of approval of the environmental assessment states that compliance monitoring by the proponent is required to prepare and implement a compliance monitoring program and outlines the minimum requirements. It does not give complete details. There's no restriction on the city in the notice of approval from exercising its authority to include an environmental and human risk assessment and a risk-based compliance monitoring program as part of the official plan amendment and the zoning amendment. Some of the things in the surface water. In this slide, you'll see the site outlined approximately in red, and the municipal drains that follow the site and follow into Shaw's Creek. On the top right of this slide, you'll notice the village of Vars. Shaw's Creek flows right by. I've also seen manure spill in the Castor River that's just beyond where I live. This is from a cleaning fluid spill in the Castor River. I've also witnessed a major disaster in Europe, the Sandoz chemical accident in the Rhine River that killed the Rhine River fish population from Switzerland to the Netherlands in 1986. Remember, the drains and the Shaw's Creek from this site will pass by Vars, and they're used by children for playing, much like what I did when I was a kid. I also have to note that the South Nation Conservation Authorities volunteer monitoring for the health of these various creeks and streams is a volunteer one. It is not adequate to mitigate any risks from this site. Also, with respect to groundwater, this is extremely difficult to detect. It's almost impossible to clean up once it's been leaked, and this site does not have a bottom liner. They are going to plan on using the clear existing clay ground that's in the site.
Sir, I just want to let you know that you have
30 seconds.
30 minutes, holy goodness.
Yeah, I wish. The groundwater is used for farm and domestic uses, and the sampling is done sometimes as little as only once per year. The risk-based monitoring is not new. It's used in the UK. It's a prudent approach recommended by various consultants already, and it provides assurance that this site will not endanger human health. It carries out a monitoring program that considers each landfill's uniqueness. And it establishes standards and objectives based on risk. Finally, I'm asking that the city exercise its Municipal and Planning Act authority to require that a proper risk-based human health risk assessment, and consequently that the proponent develop a comprehensive risk-based monitoring and reporting program as permitted in the notice of approval. That's it. Thank you. The bibliography you have in my further notes and slides.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armstrong, for providing us that stuff in advance too. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Dr. Hammonds. And we'll have Mark Ryan afterwards, so if you want to come down and grab the empty seat.
Thank you, Chairman and fellow councillors and audience. The main issue that impacted the residents of the Carlsbad Springs meeting a few months ago concerned the proposed landfill site seriously impacts on traffic along Boundary Road. I'm here today to bring forth how this proposed site impedes traffic along Boundary and how the City of Ottawa should implement ways to best address the concerns of this dilemma. I'm a family physician that lives southeast of the landfill site, downwind. I've been a family physician in Russell for 38 years. My family resided just south of Frontier and Divine Road. In '63, I was a student in the one-room schoolhouse that closed up shop at 65. And now I've been working as a family physician still for 38 years in Russell. I'm deeply concerned about this proposal site that impacts on health, environmental issues of water, air, and social issues. And as my four preceding speakers have alluded to, my first proposal is seriously to have the City of Ottawa implement a health risk assessment on how it impacts on our area. As the proponents of this landfill site have estimated that there will be 800 truck passes per day going into the landfill site, and as planned that they would be coming off Boundary Road. Also, so this is the landfill site here. Also, north of this landfill site is another proposed trucking thing where long combination vehicles will be coming off 417, going into Ottawa, unloading and coming back into this site, and again the proposed entranceway is off Boundary Road. Boundary Road is a major thoroughfare for southeastern people coming into Ottawa daily. From the north, Carlsbad Springs; from the south, Russell, Marionville, Chrysler, Chesterville, Morwood. It's a very highly trafficked area, and seeing as proponents of the estimated 800 truck passes into the landfill site off Boundary. The other site is proposed to have 6,400 passes per day of trucks going in and out, transporting up into Ottawa, coming back, and attaching and going off and on onto Boundary Road. So citizens who are using Boundary Road are absolutely fearful of what's going to happen for safety. I have another solution than what is proposed, and that's why I'm here today, is to see that we as the people that are coming into Ottawa using Boundary are not seriously affected by traffic. And I feel that by why I'm here today, there is another option that is going to be cost effective and positive for not only proponents who are going to be using these sites and not affecting public traffic. First of all, look at Frontier Road. Frontier Road right now does not have anyone living on it north of Divine. There's no people living there. There's no traffic there. So why not have our proponents of the landfill site, instead of exiting and entering from Boundary, why could they not enter off Frontier? The other thing is this other site, with the cooperation with Taggart Miller, working in some cooperation of also accessing Frontier, and again, all these large trucks that are coming in and out at the 7,200 number of truck passes per day, how it impedes on other people coming on and off Boundary Road, onto 417, off Thunder Road. How that impact of traffic, what the council here has proposed of expanding the length and having a turning lane left to go onto these sites. When you have trucks that are the combination vehicles of 6,400 vehicles coming on and off, these are long, huge trucks going across a traffic route. That is going to cause serious constraints. So my first proposal was the health risks. Second proposal was that now that council look at an entranceway off Frontier instead of Boundary, so it doesn't impede normal population traffic off Boundary Road to cause risk. The next thing is also looking at proposal number...
Sorry, where you can't hear me, but just ask you to wrap up in the next 30 seconds or so, if you could.
Next proposal is to have MTO look at an exit, either off Frontier. And if you look east, there is Divine Overpass off 417, where I'm circled here, that MOT could look either Frontier and looking at, or Divine Overpass, of having vehicles come off there instead of off Boundary, to allow trucks to stay in this area and the public continue to use Boundary. The last proposal is proposal 4 of expansion of Burton Road, so that now traffic south will not have to go up Divine and Frontier and go up Burton and bypass all the truck areas, if that's going to be the area. As we could see already, in the future, this looks very much idealistic, like an industrial park area with all you have this going on. There's now going to be public traffic coming from south, going from Burton and Boundary this way, and the trucks and all heavy industry vehicles staying between Frontier, Divine, either exiting off here or here. That is my proposal, gentlemen and Chairman.
All right, thank you. Just a quick clarification. You mentioned the property north of, between Boundary Road and the site. You said there's some proposal for 6,400 trucks a day. That's
it's called Gate. The proposed trucking thing that was mentioned is called East Gateway Transport Shop. This site right here has been proposed as a long combination vehicle site right in this area, just north of the landfill site.
And the number of 6,400 trucks a day is accurate? It's 13 trucks a minute. How does that even make sense?
Yes.
Anyways.
Truck passes. So a pass means that the truck goes in, leaves, goes back in again. So that vehicle, that truck is 6,400 passes per day out of that site, and the landfill site is 800 passes per day.
All right, thanks. Any questions from members of the committee? No? All right, thank you for your presentation. Mr. Ryan? And Laurie McCannell will be up next after Mr. Ryan.
Bonjour. Mon nom est Marc Ryan. J'habite en Brun avec mon épouse depuis 1975, 3 de nos 4 enfants et 6 petits-enfants. J'ai œuvré 10 ans dans le développement international avant de devenir courtier en assurance pour la firme de Cooperators durant 23 ans. Diplômé en philosophie et en coopération internationale, j'ai occupé de nombreux postes de bénévolat dans une pléiade d'associations et d'institutions. Membre fondateur de la Cité collégiale et j'ai été président de la Fédération des aînés francophones de l'Ontario. Je veux parler du concept de responsabilité ou, exprimé autrement, le concept de négligence. Tout d'abord, le ministre Glenn Murray, champion de la politique de cap and trade en émission des gaz de carbone dans le gouvernement Wynne, a terminé sa carrière en approuvant le projet de dépotoir Taggart-Miller. Sans doute la plus grosse erreur professionnelle de cet homme politique. Le ministre Murray a effectivement bloqué la possibilité des citoyens de présenter les analyses scientifiques devant un tribunal et cela aurait pu démontrer que ce projet de dépotoir aboutira inévitablement à une catastrophe écologique dans la capitale. Comment Glenn Murray peut dormir le soir comme directeur général de l'Institut environnemental Pembina? Ça relève du ministère. Gravement d'éthique également et de respect lors des consultations avec le public gérées par le proposeur. 63% de la population affectée est francophone et n'a pas eu droit à une consultation dans sa langue. Même quand la parade TMES s'est présentée en brun, l'ingénieur présentateur était unilingue anglophone. Les documents scientifiques étaient aussi en anglais. Aucune traduction n'a été offerte. De prétendre que les droits des francophones ont été respectés relève de la fumisterie. L'étude et les consultations effectuées par le proposeur sont incomplètes et truffées de propositions vagues. Et les fonctionnaires provinciaux et municipaux de conclure que le proposeur a promis, le proposeur va adresser les problèmes, le proposeur assure que l'impact sera négligeable. Voilà un abandon de la responsabilité envers la population. Négligence dangereuse. La négligence inconsciente quand l'information est insuffisante ou bien quand les décideurs refusent de lire la documentation. L'ignorance est une forme d'omission. Pour ceux et celles qui ont lu les études et constaté les faiblesses du projet, eh bien, leur responsabilité est encore plus grave, car elle est intentionnelle et consciente. D'autres diraient que c'est de la négligence criminelle. Ce que vous êtes en train de faire aujourd'hui, en approuvant ce changement de zonage, c'est de vous insérer comme complice dans un réseau, dans un processus de négligence. À Carp, il y a déjà une montagne qui a fait mentir toutes les compagnies d'ingénieurs et qui ont affirmé année après année qu'il n'y aurait pas de problème. Et cette montagne coule vers le ruisseau qui l'entoure. Aucun dépotoir n'a été contenu. Le site du projet Taggart-Miller est encore plus fragile et moins élevé. Il suffit de vous promener dans les champs tout autour, maintenant au printemps, pour constater la nappe phréatique s'élève au niveau du sol. Année après année, les champs sont inondés. On voit d'immenses flaques d'eau partout. Pendant la saison agricole, tous les champs sont drainés parce qu'ils regorgent d'eau. Nous sommes en plein cœur de l'ancienne mer de Champlain, une des dernières nappes aquifères non polluées dans l'espace habité sur notre planète. Déposer une montagne de déchets en peu de temps, dites adieu aux sources d'eau naturelles. Une telle contamination ne peut pas être corrigée ou remédiée. Les déchets d'hôpitaux et de pharmacies ne vont pas disparaître. Ce genre de contamination progresse de manière exponentielle à travers la nappe aquifère. Qui va assumer la responsabilité? Elles disparaissent. Pour se protéger, les compagnies vident leurs corporations de leurs actifs et font faillite. Elles disparaissent en plaçant leur argent dans les abris fiscaux. C'est le contribuable qui paye les dégâts. Il suffit de regarder les dépotoirs de mines dans le nord du Canada. Il suffit de constater l'état de santé des Autochtones à Grassy Narrows. 40 ans plus tard, alors qu'on trouve des barils de mercure et des métaux lourds dont on n'a jamais voulu admettre l'existence. Reed Paper est disparu depuis longtemps. Négligence criminelle envers les Autochtones. Et le 30 janvier dernier, la presse révélait qu'un entrepreneur à Montréal a déversé 3000 tonnes de terre contaminée au mercure et aux métaux lourds quelque part dans l'est de l'Ontario, sans que personne s'en aperçoive.
30 secondes.
C'est ça.
Merci.
La loi ontarienne de l'environnement, c'est comme un permis, une licence pour violeurs en série. Vous avez une responsabilité dans ce projet. Vous avez la responsabilité de surveiller, de contrôler les dégâts et problèmes qui vont émaner de ce projet catastrophique. Ce sont les contribuables qui vont payer un jour. Les compagnies veulent se surveiller elles-mêmes avec un minimum de règlement. Enfin, il y a des moyens techniques pour détecter la moindre fuite, sous et en dehors d'un dépotoir. Il faut que ces appareils détecteurs soient installés avant le développement du projet. Cette surveillance doit être confiée à une instance publique, redevable aux électeurs. La plus grande négligence que vous pourriez commettre, c'est celle de laisser faire. Se boucher les oreilles, fermer les yeux sur le dépotoir Taggart-Miller pendant le développement va coûter très cher. On ne peut continuer à demander aux futures générations de corriger les erreurs que nous commettons aujourd'hui. Ou peut-être qu'il est temps de faire un deuxième appel à Glenn Murray, qui est maintenant directeur général de l'Institut Pembina. Peut-être qu'il pourrait nous aider. Merci.
Merci pour votre présentation. Je sais, conseiller Blais.
Oui, merci, merci pour la présentation. C'est très rare d'avoir une présentation en français à notre comité ici, à le comité d'agriculture. Donc, merci encore. J'agrée que le processus provincial il y a plusieurs erreurs et problèmes avec ce processus-là. Et j'agrée que le ministère Murray n'a pas fait la diligence nécessaire à le commencement du processus. Mais je pense que c'est difficile pour la municipalité de justifier une dépense énorme pour avoir une contradiction contre le gouvernement provincial quand ils ont déjà donné leur approval de le processus. Donc, on va travailler très fort pour améliorer les éléments qui sont dans le domaine municipaux et que les résidents d'Ottawa qui vont payer tous ces coûts peuvent être satisfaits sur les choses qui sont la responsabilité de la Ville d'Ottawa.
Merci. Des questions pour la délégation? Non? Merci beaucoup. So, Laurie McCannell, I know you've been before us before, so you know you have 5 minutes.
Good morning. I've been involved with this since the very beginning, and so I'm just going to go over briefly what I understand about how we got here today. 10 years ago, a Taggart company chose a busted-down quarry in Russell as the first step towards handling their own commercial and industrial waste. Owning their own dump would save them money on disposal, plus high waste tipping fees promise good income in the waste business. After years of engineering, they scooted over to the bog on Boundary Road and a fresh round of devilish engineering. I have never seen such well-kept engineering consultants. If market conditions allow, the applicant would make money diverting some recyclable stuff at their landfill. There is no enforceable percent for that diversion. As we've now seen on the nightly news, market conditions don't allow for much diversion. Canada's export recycling sham is dead, but the applicant would clearly still make money for every ton of IC&I waste that they landfill. Sure, Ottawa does not need a fourth commercial industrial dump, but it amounts to revenue for the city. Some at City Hall may even think the city can, get an arrangement for their own institutional waste if one of the area's largest developers opens a dump. The city is looking at several different forms of revenue from this project. At a minimum, there's $2 per ton to the Solid Waste Reserve Fund, plus 50 cents a ton to the Community Compensation Project. Solid Waste Reserve Funds are rolled into general revenues now, but they are intended to enable technical support for communities impacted by landfills in Ottawa. Mr. Blais made a motion to basically approve the applications for the zoning things with holds. But it looks to me like what he's asking is stuff the ministry already requires in their approval, which is that the landfill can't be built before the recycling parts. That's already in the approval from the ministry. And also, there's a list of environmental impacts that need to be addressed. They've been 8 years working at this to address those kind of concerns, and yet there's still significant risks that aren't even really well defined around this project. So you've heard a human health impact study has been requested today. It was also requested 6 years ago during the EA, the terms of reference for the EA. But it is a scoped EA, as someone else pointed out. When this project was first proposed, it was proposed in Russell, and it was not a scoped EA, it was a full EA. Then there was a subsequent draft of the terms of reference where it had been scoped down, and at that point, the health part was dropped. This has all been handled, though, at a provincial level. I understand what you're saying, that an approval at the provincial level is not something that can be overturned here, and I get that. Of course, it was never the province's job to ensure that a scoped EA would satisfy local planning requirements like Ottawa's official plan, section 3.8. Whatever. That's not the province's job. They made sure it fit their rules, and it did. So if it doesn't measure up to what Ottawa needs, that's not the province's problem. Ottawa should not slacken its planning rules, which are essential to protect the city from liability. The landfill proposes to contain pollution without a bottom liner, which I think someone explained. There is a proposal for a peripheral liner around the top, not under the bottom, because at the bottom there's going to be an experimental system which pipes groundwater up from the base of the dump, contaminated water at that point. But the soil on the site is too soft to support the landfill. This is also from their own documents. It's going to sink at least 8 meters. So how are the pipes underneath supposed to hold together when the whole thing is collapsing 8 meters? Our contention is there's a good risk those pipes will come apart and that will contaminate the ground, which is not all clay. There's layers of sand and there's groundwater down there too. Other risks. The destination for the pollution which is sucked out and trucked away from the site is supposed to be ROPEC, but the Robert O. Picard Center may not be able to take all of the daily tankers that would come out of this. My understanding is they're going to be not accepting tankers on the weekend anymore. I believe that went through last year. So I don't know how they're going to just stockpile trucks all weekend. But anyways, if an alternative way of disposing leachate has to be used, which is sort of hinted at in their report, the implications of that haven't been studied. There's no implication studied for, like, if they're going to treat and just discharge it off the site, no studies on what that's going to do downstream. This is an open-ended plan. It puts surface and groundwater at risk, and it creates liability for the City of Ottawa. The surface water studies that are done in the EA report use a 24-hour precipitation model that doesn't adequately account for sequential days of heavy rain. Maybe we remember last year where it rained for days and days and days. That's not modeled. It should be modeled because that's something we should expect will happen, and we should study what would then happen to pollution in those full ditches. The City of Ottawa Rural Employment Lands Inventory finds there's 80-plus years' worth of suitably zoned land sitting idle, but the company chose to buy improperly zoned land for the project, and now they want consideration. My question is, why would the city spend money inventorying a problem if it refuses to solve it, given the chance? Rezoning this land for this project contravenes professional land use policy, your own professional policy. The OMB system is gone, and the replacement for it will be more protective of professional and municipal plans, so it's unclear to me if staff's assessment of the potential legal costs for defending any planning decision is current. I'm going off the numbers that were in the thing. But it is clear to me the city's costs would be many millions of dollars if this unproven industrial waste facility were to contaminate land, air, streams, people, livestock, and/or wells. The consequences of today's planning decisions will not outlive the lawyers. Maybe this committee will choose to sign off on health risks and negative environmental impacts that haven't been quantified. No matter how many doctors or scientists warn you it's a bad idea, I wouldn't sign off on it. I'm Laurie McCannell. I farm in the breadbasket of Ottawa, Cumberland Ward.
Thank you. Any questions for the delegation? No? Thanks very much. Time. Okay, so we have two more speakers. Gilles Berube is our next speaker.
Hi, my name is Gilles Berube. I'm a resident of Russell. I'm in business all my life in Russell for 40 years. What I do for a living is assess risks. I'm a financial advisor, and when I'm sitting down with a client, if there's any kind of risk, in order to cover my butt, I have to write it down and make sure they understand what risks they're taking, and the procedures to keep my license. I can get people to come and visit my books and see how I'm dealing with my business to make sure my clients know the potential risks they're in, and at all time, all my notes have to be taken care of. This is obviously something that we all have to think about here. There's obviously an element of risk here, and if you were all my clients, I would have to write everybody a letter and say, there's a potential risk here, but this is just to cover my butt. I would have to do that. The only way you could take this off your shelf and off risk to the town, to the city of Ottawa, is to obviously have a health assessment risk put up front and know what you're up against, so that when you're making this decision, you have all of it in front of you without a shadow of a doubt. At least you would be covered, at least you would have something to back you up into the future. Right now, I know if you ask Tiger Miller to go ahead and impose this health assessment risk, it will be a cost to them, absolutely. And this gentleman that just walked away mentioned it in French. But this cost to them now will be your cost in the future when it does, if it does become a problem. And the City of Ottawa will have to address it at that time in the future. And that is my evaluation as being a risk assessor. Also the province and the Russell Village, the city, and everybody that's in. Maybe by then, maybe Russell will be part of Ottawa, who knows. But we'll all be sitting in the same dilemma. We're going to be, if there is an element of cost, it might be a burden on us in the near future. So that's basically my presentation. Very simple, straightforward. I really recommend strongly that there is a health and assessment risk being done. And I hope that Tiger Miller will reassess this and voluntarily come up and do the right thing for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not sure Russell will ever become a part of Ottawa. I don't know a lot of municipalities that neighbor us that are clamoring to be amalgamated into the City of Ottawa.
But if I have to say that Ottawa did great things for Russell, if you come to Russell and visit our museum, you will see we have a Shelby pumper that Ottawa supplied us in 1915 and saved half our town from burning down. And Russell recognizes how Ottawa been very good to Russell. It took 2 hours for them to rush this down to New York Central, and there was a team of horses waiting for that. And me, being a volunteer fireman, when I was age of 16, was told over and over by my fire chief, Russ Fair, how Ottawa came through for us. And we still appreciate it. Thank you very much for that help. And I hope today you will recognize we still need your help today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Questions? No, we're good. Yeah, you question? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. And we heard it time and time again from some of your colleagues talking about the health assessment and the health risk assessment. And you said it more than once in your presentation. Mm-hmm. You know as well as I do, this is where in the hand of the minister, whether they request that, the provincial government requests that or not as a part of their EA. So it's not for this group. I just want to make it clear because it seems every one of you talk about the same thing, and I'm not sure if they know the city have no jurisdiction on that.
I was on the assumption that the planning board, before they would approve this, all of this risk would have to be associated. This is why it stopped at your level now. You say it's not your mandate at all? What is your mandate? Is just approve it or done deal?
So I have questions for staff relating from the presenters' comments and several others. I was going to wait to ask these later, but might as well just do it now. Mr. Mark is our solicitor, our lawyer, and he's our expert lawyer in planning matters. Does our committee and does the city at this point have the legal authority under the Planning Act, which is what we're operating in today, to require a human health risk assessment as part of what's before us today?
In my opinion, Mr. Chair, the City of Ottawa would not have jurisdiction under the Planning Act to require a human health risk assessment be done by the applicant for the OPA and for the zoning, nor would it have jurisdiction to require it to be done once a site plan is before the city for approval.
And should, for the sake of argument, the city decide to fund such an assessment on our own, would we be allowed to use the results of that assessment as part of our judgment for the Planning Act applications that are before us?
Again, Mr. Chair, my response would be no. The city could, if it funded a study and did it itself, it could use that as part of its comments on monitoring to the ministry, but wouldn't allow the city to refuse the amendments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mark.
So it would have to be requested voluntarily, or the city would have to take it up. So at the end of the day, we still have to do the right thing. And there is an element of risk. We can't just make that disappear. It doesn't matter how the rules and regulations are put together. There is an element of risk. And before we make a decision, I think that we should carefully look at this. And it should be done voluntarily when you think about it. I wouldn't impose that on my neighbors. At least open up the books and show it, unless I'm totally afraid of what could be discovered. That's what it leaves behind, and that's what's concerned. If this was done obviously up front, and it would be an element of risk assessment done, and it would be left, and that would be taken care of. But then, because if it's not done, then there's always doesn't look good on the back of the proponent. So that's all I'm saying, and maybe they can rectify that. They have an opportunity here to win a lot of people's approval. There's been a lot of ruckus over this. I think if they would just step up and do this, it would be a very good promotional way of doing this. We'd enormously appreciate that, of course. But that's all I can request. That's all I can ask.
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee?
Any questions?
No. Thank you.
Thank you for my time. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So our final speaker appears to be the applicant, so it's Michelle Taggart and Denis Goulet. I don't know if you're interested in coming and speaking, or if you just want to, in case there's questions, it's up to you. Do you want to come speak? Do we have questions for the applicant? Yes. Okay. So come on up. Just for some questions for sure.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Michelle Taggart, the applicant. This is Denis Goulet with Miller Group.
All right. Thank you for being here today. So, Councillor Blais, I'll let you.
Thanks very much, and thank you for coming this morning. I have some questions following some of the public delegations and some of the comments that were made by some of the presenters. So I'm just going to go through my list. They're in an order of how I took my notes, so bear with me. There were comments about the 5-kilometer radius for the home protection plan, and that radius should extend from the outer edge of the property and not from the center line of the property. I think Mr. Baker raised that. Is that something that Taggart Miller is open to changing, or was the interpretation of that correct?
Yes, thank you for the question and for the opportunity to clarify. The 5-kilometer property value protection does extend from the edge of the site. The map was for illustrative purposes, but it could be redrawn, and the wording in the EA does clearly say that it's taken from the edge of the site.
Also, can you, obviously there's been a great deal of discussion about the human health impacts, and obviously we've heard our legal opinion in terms of what we're allowed to require, but from a monitoring perspective, can you describe to the committee what you're obligated to do vis-a-vis monitoring, both groundwater and air quality monitoring, and what measures you're going to take perhaps above what is the bare minimum requirement?
Sure. Okay, so I think I'll start out just by saying that we consulted with the MOEE, with the Ministry of the Environment on this issue, and that the Ministry of the Environment does not require this specific study. They have their own criteria for meeting human health, doing a human health assessment, and Yeah, it's viewed, the human health risk assessment specific study that the community is talking about is viewed by the ministry as being duplicative of the studies that we have already done as part of the environmental assessment. So the job of the MOE is to come up with the air, water, ground standards for protecting human health, and we're meeting all these standards, and we are going above and beyond in many cases, which I can get Paul Smolkin, who's our engineer, to come up and talk a little bit more about. So it is our opinion, and it's the ministry's opinion, that we've already addressed everything that would be a part of this HHRA already through the EA. We will be monitoring air, water, ground very closely. MOE inspectors will be on site regularly to ensure that we're completing our work, and we're required to report regularly. So if you want to hear a little bit more detail on the types of monitoring equipment and where it'll be and how often, I can bring our engineer up. Okay, Paul?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Paul Smolkin with Golder Associates. I've been involved with this project since the start, and our company has done most of the engineering studies and impact assessments for the project. In terms of the monitoring programs, there is the Ontario regulation, the landfill standard, sets out some minimum requirements for monitoring for groundwater and surface water in particular, and the programs that we have in place are proposed for the site do comply with those requirements. There is groundwater monitoring for both the diversion facilities area in the north part of the site and for the landfill in the south part of the site. The sampling program occurs generally 2 or 3 times a year in these monitors. There's also a surface water monitoring program for the discharge of surface water that leaves the site. There's a noise monitoring program at the closest receptors, which are just down around the Boundary Road, Divine Road intersection, which is the closest part to where the landfill site will get to at some point. There is an air monitoring program. As was mentioned in one of the presentations, it does include dust monitoring, but in the monitoring program proposal that's in front of the ministry right now to get the environmental compliance approval for the site, we also have included monitoring of a volatile organic compounds, the health-related concerns that could come off the site. That's a voluntary program put forward by Taggart Miller. It's not something which is commonly done for non-hazardous landfill sites. There is a traffic. People have expressed some concerns about traffic. We have committed to doing monitoring of the traffic coming and leaving the site to see how that lines up with the projections that were made and how that works with the intersection improvements at the entrance road. There are some biological monitoring programs looking at effects primarily as it relates to effects on surface water and as a result of runoff from the site. And there's also a requirement on this site under the Endangered Species Act. We have to provide some alternative habitat for barn swallow, and there's a monitoring program for that alternative habitat that we will monitor to make sure it's effective. And there was some concerns expressed about the landfill and its design and how it will perform. There's a geotechnical monitoring program that goes with that to monitor stability, settlement, etc. of the landfill to see how it's performing compared to the predictions. I think that would be that's an overview of the monitoring programs for the site.
And thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. All of what you've described seems to be contained to the parcel that is owned by the company, and I understand why that might make sense. But how do we monitor effects that might leave you don't have a force field around your property? How do you monitor the effects of air pollutants, water pollutants, etc., as they might travel across the region, whether it's south to Russell and Embrun or east of ours or north to whatever's north?
I think the basis for the program is that the highest or the largest effects, the potential for them to occur is right at the site. And so you start off by monitoring at the site. If you start to detect things that you think are going farther off site, you can extend your monitoring program. But that's why it starts where it starts as we've proposed.
And so what's the process for that? If you start detecting things at the edge of your site that are abnormal to what you had predicted, what happens next?
What you do is you propose to, this is in discussion with the Ministry of the Environment, you basically propose to amend your monitoring program and describe why and describe what you're going to do. And you have a discussion with the ministry, you get approval, and you proceed with the program.
And so your monitoring program is still with the ministry awaiting its approval?
The monitoring programs were outlined through the EA process as well, but the second stage of approvals from the ministry is to get the license or the environmental compliance approval for the site, and the final details of those programs are part of that application. But they are with a few minor changes and add-ons. They're basically the same as was in the EA document.
And the process to amend them, if that's necessary in the future, is that a public process? What is that? Can you describe?
That is a process between the proponent and the ministry. But I would say that in this case, where we have a community liaison committee, that's a way of involving the public and the people who live in the area in what's going on at the site and in making the changes that are proposed to the program.
Thank you very much for that. So, Ms. Taggart, perhaps you can describe the role of the Community Liaison Committee and exactly what kinds of information they're going to receive throughout construction and operation, etc.
Yes, okay. Thank you. So the Community Liaison Committee has been set up. Right now we have 6 members. We've had 2 meetings so far. And the role of the committee is to review basically our reports, our monitoring, any activity that's going on site. They also serve as a conduit through, an unofficial conduit through the broader community, so they can bring issues to us at our regular meeting that we can address. And yeah, it's a 6-member panel.
But will if you detect contaminants at higher levels than you anticipate, or if you detect contaminants leaving the site, is the Community Liaison Committee informed of that?
Absolutely.
How does that work in real life?
Okay. We've just struck the committee, and I don't know exactly how the mechanism, but there might be somebody else. Dennis has been through this before, so I'll get him to answer.
I think I could add one thing, is there's also requirements, that will be part of our approval to advise if there are, occurrent, whether it's groundwater, surface water, air, things detected. We have a requirement to speak to, to report to the City of Ottawa, to the local councillors, to the health department, etc.
That's right. So the committee will be provided with a copy of the design and operations report, and during our regularly scheduled meetings, we will make them aware of all the activities on the site. If there are any issues, they will be made aware of them in advance, and they will be very much involved in communication with the municipality and the community.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Councillor DeRusse?
Thank you. You said that we'll be able to have a term and reference of this PLC, the Public Liaison Committee, to circle to the member of this committee? Yes. And also, will you be ensured that on the PLC we always have a member from the surrounding area, which is, I need someone from our community, which is probably somebody from Edward or the surrounding area within the 5 kilometers?
Yes, so we do have a terms of reference set up, and I will forward that on to the city. Currently, we have a member from each of the 2 wards that the site is near, and we will ensure that that's always the case.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So, no other questions for the applicant? No. All right. Thank you for coming up. So I know Councillor Blais had some questions for staff. I was going to ask about the monitoring program. I think that's been covered by the applicant. So I know that, did you want to invite the folks from Public Health? Yeah. If the folks from Public Health could come up to the front here.
Thank you. There's been a lot of discussion. I think the vast majority of the discussion this morning has been relating around the potential impacts to human health that may come from the operations of this facility. So I'm wondering, Public Health's comments were that they basically had no comments. And so I'm wondering if Public Health can provide slightly more detail as to what exactly it did in terms of reviewing the environmental assessment and why it believes that you had nothing more to say on the matter, I guess.
Yes, so my name is Munir Taha. I'm one of the Associate Medical Officers of Health with Ottawa Public Health. So I'm pleased to be here representing Ottawa Public Health, and this is Martha Robinson. Now, Martha has a long history with Ottawa Public Health. I've been here less than 2 years. I want to start off just by clarifying, because internally in Ottawa Public Health, we have a very, very, very small team that addresses issues of environmental health and health hazards. So our usual practice with many things is to rely upon our provincial partners for their assessment, their review, and to see if we can add anything in as much as our experience or expertise can add something to what's done by, in this case, the Ministry of Environment, who has engineering staff and other specialists that we do not. In this process, going and reviewing our inputs, we participated, Ottawa Public Health participated in the input process on 3 occasions in 2012, 2015, and 2016, the first of which was when the terms of reference for the environmental assessment was circulated. At that time, we noted that air, noise, groundwater, surface water, odor, so the types of roots and issues that could impact human health were to be looked at in the environmental assessment. So we did not have any comments. We just said we'd like to remain informed about the project. At the next point in 2015, this was when comments were being received on the EA study, and at that point we had some small comments on sampling from residential wells, and it was limited to that. And then finally, the next point of commentary was when the MOECC had itself responded to the comments, and at that point we noted that we were satisfied that the monitoring plan would provide advance notice of potential offsite migration of groundwater contaminants. I say that specifically because that was our specific comment. So again, we rely very much on our partner, the Ministry of Environment, and realize that they have expertise that we are unable to duplicate in-house.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Do you have other questions for staff on other aspects of the report? From any members of council, from any members of the committee? Questions come? So any other questions for staff? Okay, so we'll just do wrap-up comments. Councillor Drews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to, just so for the record, it's been a long time project going on, and I kind of took it over in the last 3 years, and I've been engaged in public consultation, and we did have to send letters to the ministry about our comment, and we did so. And I did actually attended a couple public meetings in the last year or so. And the way I look at it is, because the ministry approved all this, and this is our provincial, and plus hearing from our resident and some of our comment that we heard today from delegation and talking with the legal, that it doesn't matter what we do into the public health, our public health assuring and making sure that we did all our due diligence. And looking at the surrounding fact, we did have some transportation issue in our community, and I want to thank staff and Councillor Blais and the committee that working with us to making sure that we do have signalized turning lane, left turning lanes on boundaries and the Thunder and Mitch Owens, and we have signalized at boundaries. So this is all good things for us because it impacts Mitch Owens, of course, and the traffic. So really, from from our stand of view here, we could hold this and we can really vote against it. But the fact is really what we're doing, like we're just probably buying times. It's the province who approved that. The city helped the committee back. I remember before my time that we did give them $75,000 to help the community to be able to retain lawyer or do what they have to do to help them working against this facility. But I mean, the time come right now for us is it's in front of us. It's a province approved it. The city really cannot do much about it. So I just want to publicly making sure this comment is out and making sure that where we stand on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Druce. Councillor El-Shantiri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the folks who made the trip all the way here from the East End. I have to tell you, I feel for you because obviously we have to been through it in CARP and we've still been through it. But one thing, if we learn from this process, no matter what we do, what we can do to mitigate the effect of that landfill, I think that's our job here to help you to do this. Having a liaison committee is a step in the right direction. We have very active committee in our area. We work together with the management of the site, and I hate my microphone because it's cutting out. But maybe this one should go to the landfill. So basically, what we're dealing here today is the zoning application. And I would support the zoning application because it have all the mitigation our colleague worked so hard to get where we are today. Not supporting the zoning today and go to other level of government, that mean you lose the right of all those you negotiated with. So from someone who's been through this in the last 12 years, since 2006, I think you come a long way. You're doing all the right thing, and we have all the right steps in place. I ask our staff as well. I know we heard it time and time again about the risk assessment, health study. Well, all that really in the hand of the province. And if the province didn't ask for and don't think there's a need for, I don't think the city can do anything in this matter. And you heard from our legal. So I just want to applaud my colleague for stick handling this situation and really try to make a lemonade out of this lemon. So my kudos to Councillor Blais for his work on this file. And to our staff as well.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Blais.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This has certainly been a long and protracted process. I remember when I first heard that this was going to be a possibility, I think I actually read a John Willing article, and that's how I found out about it. And I described it as a punch in the gut. And the wind's been knocked out of me for almost 7 years on this. Over that time, the city has made several comments critical of the terms of reference, critical of the environmental assessment process, critical of the consultation process, critical of the lack of bilingualism. Throughout the length of that process, both formally through resolutions at council, comments provided by our expert staff, political intervention from myself and from the mayor. And unfortunately, the province has trucked ahead, literally, as we've heard, with thousands of trucks. We've now come to a point where the province has provided their environmental okay. We have a legal opinion as part of the report that says declining this OPA and zoning, OPA and zoning request would require the hiring of outside counsel and outside planning experts, that it would cost, I think it was into the hundreds of thousands of dollars to city taxpayers, and that the chances of our success were nearly zero. And that's a direct cost to taxpayers. I imagine, as is typically the case, the proponents tend to spend double or triple what the city ends up spending on these things in terms of lawyers. So there's money out the door there as well. Given that overwhelming chance of failure and the enormity of the expense to do so, it seems more rational to try to improve the situation as best we can within the authority and the responsibility of the City of Ottawa. The public meeting held, I think it was slightly before Christmas, if memory serves. Certainly the two prevailing issues were the health impact, or the potential of health impacts, and traffic. We have worked, as we've heard from our lawyer, we do not have the authority on the health issue as part of the Planning Act. And even if we were to conduct such a study ourselves, we could not use it as a basis for rejecting the Planning Act applications. On the traffic issues, we have worked with the applicant and the applicant at East Gateway to identify a half dozen modifications to Boundary Road, to the highway interchanges, to help facilitate the flow of traffic, both the commercial traffic that will be produced as a result of these two applications, but also to ensure that our neighbors in Embrun and Chrysler and Finch and everywhere else south that might use this connection can still come into the City of Ottawa for work or entertainment or to visit family. In my experience, the cost of doing these modifications is high, and I think that's an important factor, and the costs for those modifications will be borne by the applicants and not by taxpayers. This has certainly been not just a basket full of lemons, but 6,000 truckloads of lemons dropped at our door, and we have been working hard to try to make the best of what is obviously a very bad situation. I would be happy to work with Kripke, if it still is in operation, to understand. Kripke is the group that was formed to dump the dump, and it was the recipient of the grant that Councillor Derues mentioned. There is still a significant amount of money available within that grant that the organization can apply to use, and if there were additional health studies that they wanted to fund through that report, I would be happy to help them pursue that or to change the guidelines of the grant for that group to use that money to do those things, to help with the monitoring or what have you, as Mr. Mark indicated might be potential. And so I have introduced two motions, is relating to the construction of roadways and intersections, the construction of the two facilities, the East Gateway and Resource Recovery Center, in and of themselves. Only that would be disruptive, to be sure, let alone the intersections and highway interchanges, is to require that the two property owners work together through that construction process way to reduce as much as possible, if altogether, well, not altogether, but as much as possible, the inconvenience and nuisance of that construction, so that those modifications are coordinated. It would seem to me that that is in their best interest, even just financially. You don't want to be repping up work that someone else just did the year before. And so I hope that they will work with the city to do that. And of course, we're landed primarily with this issue, as Councillor DeRuz and Councillor El-Shantiri have both articulated quite well, because the province insists on maintaining control of IC&I and C&D waste from a regulatory perspective, but the burden of dealing with it and the nuisance that arises from it rests with the municipality, and more importantly, neighbors, both institutional and residential, that are nearby these facilities. So I'm requesting that the city formally request to the Government of Ontario that we be given regulatory control of IC&I and C&D waste within Ottawa. It's probably a good idea for other big municipalities, but I'll let them decide what's good for them, and that we receive the funding commensurate with the necessity of monitoring and implementing those regulations. I am also very satisfied that the holding provisions are included in the report. Just to articulate again, in the event it was not clear, there are two holding provisions. The first is on any construction on the site at all. That holding provision can only be relieved once the province has provided all of their environmental certifications, which is, of course, their regulatory responsibility. And the second holding provision is on the opening of the landfill. There had been, and I share this concern, that businesses will choose the bottom line option, which is to bury their garbage as opposed to recycling it. There are some, I'm sure, who have a social mandate and social conscience and will take the more expensive approach, but many businesses are bottom line. And so the second holding provision is to ensure that the recycling facilities are established before the landfilling operation can open. And our hope is that through those provisions and through this site, we can have a higher degree of diversion, recycling from our institutional, construction, and industrial sectors. And if those goals are in fact achieved, and I think that is still debatable, if those goals are achieved, then it will have a net positive impact. But those are big ifs, and I wish the province had provided a little bit more thought to those ifs. I find it interesting that the MPP for the area has announced his retirement this morning on the eve of this particular process, and the minister who approved it is no longer in government. But that's an aside. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Yes, I quite enjoyed. I should have given more time to Mr. Ryan, who was constantly maligning Glen Murray. I have no issues with the malignment of Glen Murray. So on the two motions, two amendments before us on the IC&I, so the IC&I waste, that the City of Ottawa formally requests from the Government of Ontario the authority and funding to regulate the IC&I and C&D waste streams. Is that carried? And on the traffic disruption motion, that the Agricultural Affairs Committee recommend Council ensure all roadway and intersection works associated for both projects be built concurrently and be coordinated in time to ensure the minimal possible impact on the public. Is that carried? All right, and then on the motion itself, which is strictly to the on the report itself, which is strictly to the official plan and zoning bylaw, that Agricultural Affairs Committee recommend Council adopt the official plan amendment as attached as document 2 to permit integrated waste management site, which includes facilities for the purpose of recovery and recycling of waste in addition to a landfill area amendments to Schedule A to the city's official plan, and B, approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 5471, 5575, and 5613 Boundary Road, 5554, 5508, 5570, 5610, and 5800 Frontier Road to implement the new official plan amendment as detailed in document 3, and 2, the Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee approve the consultation detail section of this report. Is that item carried? All right, thank you. So we're just about to get to the site alteration bylaw item. I did miss an item earlier. I'll just let Councillor Blais put that forward right now. It was an additional item to the agenda. Did you want to introduce that now? Yeah. And then we're going to take like a 20-minute break. So if you're going to move right now, just hold off. Let us finish this one part, and then we're going to take a 20-minute break. So go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm moving that the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee approve the addition of this item for consideration by committee at the April 5th, 2018 meeting pursuant to Section 89.3 of the Procedure Bylaw, being bylaw number 2016-377, because of the timing of the legislative calendar. Whereas...
Can we have the rules of procedure to add the item?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you.
Whereas in 2011, the City of Ottawa opened a new community center at 6020 Piperville Road to replace the aging facility at 5065 Thunder Road to serve the residents of Carlsbad Springs. Whereas the city has invested heavily in the relocation of the community center and recently completed the relocation of the outdoor rink to 6020 Piperville Road. Whereas the National Capital Commission owns the land surrounding 6020 Piperville Road, which are included in the Greenbelt. And whereas there is a desire within the community to consolidate all recreational activities around the central hub in the village, and whereas the former community center building located at 5065 Thunder Road is at the end of its life, therefore be it resolved that the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council, 1, investigate the feasibility and cost of leasing additional lands from the National Capital Commission for the acreage, for access to users of the recreational facilities at 6020 Piperville Road in Carlsbad Springs. 2, investigate the feasibility of disposing of the property at 5065 Thunder Road in Carlsbad Springs to provide the source of funds for such a lease and further recreational developments at 6020 Piperville Road. And 3, return to committee and council with an implementation plan for the above by Q4 of 2018. So I amended it to Q4 of 2018.
All right, so this is an item that will come back to us at the end of this year after the study's been done. So on that item, with Councillor Blais. Sorry, question from Councillor El-Shantiri.
Just a question to legal. Can this item come back at Q4 of the year, 2018? Would we be able to make that decision then? Or will be in election mode? Just don't want to miss the opportunity. Maybe Q3 will be the answer.
The same issue may arise, Mr. Chair. I believe the lame duck rules catch the disposition of property. I'm not certain. If it did, I mean, we'd just bring it forward in the first quarter of 2019. That would be the answer to it.
Okay.
Just to clarify, though, the lame duck rules are not blanket. They only depend on the number of councillors coming back.
Yes, there has to be at least 3/4.
That's right.
Coming back for them not to apply.
Okay.
All right. So on that item, Carrie, thank you. So we're just going to take a quick break here. I'm going to come back. It's 12:03 right now. I'm going to suggest we come back at 12:20. We have a number of delegations on that item, so I don't want to take too much of a break. Thanks.